Oh. In over 3 decades of gaming, rarely has a game annoyed and frustrated me like this game has. I cannot think of another title, a single-player game no less, that has had me verbally abusing what was on my television. It's not like I had lofty aspirations for this game. Like many of you, I looked at it and thought, well, that looks fun. Let's give it a try. Oh, how wrong I was, because this game annoyed me so much that I felt compelled to make this video. It's not often that I make a video about a singular game, so here it is. You lot are my therapist, and I'm here on the proverbial couch, venting for the sake of normalizing my blood pressure. From the trailers and gameplay videos, Evil West looks great. Well, that is the job of a trailer after all. It's not a bad looking game, but even so, on current gen consoles, this cross-gen game runs at a resolution of 1080p in the performance mode, and it's pretty blurry on that mode. I tried the game at higher fidelity at 30, but there's no going back once you switch to 60 frames, especially for a game like this. The story is just poor, I think. I say that because I skipped most of it. It was that bad. I tried to bear with it for a while, but the dialogue and lame voiceover work really, it was just cringy, especially for the main antagonist and final boss. Thankfully, you can skip the cutscenes, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I did that for most of the game. But Evil West looked like it would really deliver in the gameplay department, and early on, you taste a bit of that promise, as that combat seems suitably weighty and violent at first. The game uses a mix of melee and weapon combat, kind of like Devil May Cry, except it's much, much worse. Whilst the audio feedback is great, you quickly discover that the game has hit its ceiling pretty early on. The game's idea of fun is throwing multiple enemies at you. Okay, that would be fine, I guess, if the enemies weren't so badly designed in a game where you can barely see anything because a combination of how big the enemies are, an absolutely horrendous camera that you're constantly battling half the time, that you cannot change or zoom out or increase the field of view, and the sheer abundance of enemies that the game throws at you. Who thought up these terrible enemy designs? Scrawny little enemies sit back and fight these bouncing globules of pit whilst you're fighting other similar enemies who are melee characters, so you cannot track the projectiles, whilst gigantic enemies that take up half the screen are either lunging at you or firing massive projectiles like waves that go through other enemies, so you can't even see said projectiles. So what can you do? What can you do? The game offers such poor crowd control abilities in a game that throws massive crowds at you. Often your barrage of melee attacks focus on a singular target. You should be able to hop in and out of enemies constantly while dealing significant damage and mixing up combat. There are tons of terrible design choices. A rifle that you cannot manually reload, but the game requires you to fire at these yellow props that disappear pretty fast for many enemies, especially on the hard mode. But you cannot do it because often you have to reload when that thing comes up. Why? Why even have a reload mechanic for the rifles in the game? Whoever designed the encounters in this game must have had it in their mission statement to make them as cheap and frustrating as possible. Check this out. In this encounter, you're thrown into a tiny combat area where you have a guy you cannot even kill, perched miles away, firing a Gatling gun at you, but you have to cancel their attack by shooting that yellow prompt when you have 3 big enemies who not only rush you with strong melee attacks, but also fire massive projectiles, but also the 2 smaller NPCs perched on opposite sides, also firing projectiles with prompts to cancel the yellow balls of piss. You want to do meaningful damage, but you have to keep chipping away at these individual enemies until you eventually squeeze your way out. What satisfaction is there to be had with this? This is just one encounter. For most of the late game encounters, you get this stuff happening back to back. The game introduces various boss battles, then actually throws those previous bosses at you as standard enemies, often in confined spaces with a shit ton of other smaller enemies. Amazing! It's completely lazy and bereft of any real consideration in encounter design. The last encounter before the final boss battle is such a joke. The game throws a near 30-minute battle on hard mode at you, with multiple big enemies and no checkpoints. The boss battles themselves are so uninspired, cheap, and lacking any original thought of design. The auto aim on consoles is shit. You can manually tweak its strength, but still crap, because the game is so chaotic and depending on the distance of the enemies, the auto aim is hit or miss, so the game either ends up snapping at the wrong enemy or you just don't get to aim at the right place on time because you're dealing with a bukkake of projectiles and shit on your screen. The game is also really stingy on upgrades and perks. What you're seeing here is me in the last stages of the game, and you'll see that a lot of things remain locked. The game has re-rolling stations to reset your perks. But would it not be better to just let us have all or most of the abilities so we can actually feel some sort of empowerment in a game that likes to make you feel like you have wronged the developers in a previous life in some way? And if players weren't frustrated with this, the game is littered with bugs. This right here is one of the first introductory sections of the game. I couldn't make progress because I couldn't kill this enemy. A great first impression, and the alarm bells started ringing immediately. Here I died as a result of the previously mentioned ridiculous confined encounters. Oh, and this is an enemy that blinds you in a game where you can't even bloody see because the camera zoomed in on your neck as you fight a trillion horribly designed enemies. What the But for the life of me, I don't know why, I tried to persevere. I tried again, and then the enemies were nowhere to be seen as I reloaded the checkpoint. I couldn't make any progress, so I had to start again. This happened a few times. But worse than even that, worse than all the bugs, is this one that made me want to stick my hand in a tub filled with hydrochloric acid and then fist myself. You just get stuck on stuff that is invisible, or you get stuck inside the floor, or you have these expertly placed objects in these tiny combat spaces. You're battling the camera, battling leaping enemies, waves of projectiles you can't see because the other enemies are in front of them, and then you try to dodge and roll away, but can't because reasons. It's not just me, by the way. Several others have suffered from the same thing repeatedly. Did anyone other than the consumer not test this game? Well, thankfully enough, to help ease the pressure, the developers decided to change up the pace by adding puzzles. Great. Except for the fact that the puzzles are some of the worst, most basic and pointless things in a modern game. Press buttons, push boxes, perch yourself up and shoot a target, and before you know it, you're begging the game to put you back into those terrible combat encounters again. I also found it funny that the game had a literal on-rails section just to complete that bucket list of expired last-gen shooter formula. This is an Xbox 360 PS3 gen game. What it's doing being released in this day and age, I have no idea. Are developers really that strained for original ideas? Even so, at least hone in on the game mechanics that you're seeking to rely on to entertain your gamers. The best thing Evil West has done is increase my appreciation for God of War Ragnarok even more. Obviously, you cannot compare the two despite some mechanical similarities, but with God of War, I was starting to get a little bit restless with some of the puzzles in the game. Now, don't worry about it, Studio Santa Monica. It's all good. Is it all bad, though, with Evil West? Surely there's a positive about the game. Yes, the positive is that it has an ending. Some people have told me that they have enjoyed the game, and if you're one of those people, that's fine. There's obviously something wrong with you, but that's fine. But this game is not fine. If you are on the fence about it, wait for a sale at least before paying full price for the game like I did. And I wouldn't advise playing the game on harder difficulties anyway, unless you're a fan of sadomasochism. I often like to play my games on harder difficulties, but with this one, this game has far too many problems of its own to let you enjoy it by upping the cheap factor. Evil West is a game that had a lot of promise to deliver a fun and enjoyable game, but ended up being a frustratingly badly designed and out-of-date one that is 2 generations old It's also a game that should come with a free prescription for amlodipine. Let me know what you think of the game. If you have played it and are enjoying it and disagree with me, please let me know. I'd love to hear your views as I silently judge you for being an absolute psychopath. I'm joking. It's different strokes for different folks. If you enjoyed this video, irrespective of whether or not you agreed with me, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. Woosah.